Step into a world that feels part rock and roll fairy tale, part grit, part quiet triumph, and part tragic ending. And let's talk about one of the most intriguing figures to ever electrify a stage, Phil Lynott. If you're into classic rock at all, you've almost certainly heard his smooth, evocative voice on tracks like The Boys Are Back in Town or Whiskey in the Jar. But the man behind these crowd-shaking anthems was a fascinating tapestry of cultural heritage, restless ambition, and relentless creativity. His life was shaped by a swirl of forces, an unconventional upbringing, a deep-rooted Irish identity, a dream to build something fresh in rock music, and the suffocating weight of fame and addiction. He was a musical pioneer who also wrestled with personal demons, forging timeless songs even as the pressures piled up. Born at Hallam Hospital in West Bromwich near the industrial heart of the English Midlands, Phil Lynott made his first appearance on our planet in an environment not quite ready for a star as unique as he would become. His father, Cecil Paris, hailed from Georgetown in British Guiana, now Guyana. His mother, Philomena Lynott, was an Irish woman from Dublin. It's not every day you see that particular mix in 1940s and 1950s Britain and Ireland, and Phil's lineage would shape the way people saw him and the way he saw himself. He was baptized on September 4th, not long after his birth, at a home for unmarried mothers in Selly Park. Though his father and mother were no longer together, Cecil did keep up financial support for his son, even from afar in London. Phil's mother, Philomena, was a bit of a free spirit who ended up living in Manchester and running a hotel known for welcoming all sorts of showbiz personalities. But in 1957, she decided that her boy would be better off in Dublin, raised by his grandparents, Frank and Sarah Lynott. And so the young Phil hopped over to Ireland, the country that would define his heart and soul. Imagine Phil stepping off a train or bus in Dublin, still just a child but already brimming with questions about his identity, a dark-skinned youngster living in a mostly white Irish city. He felt different from the start, but by his own account, he was spared any major racist torment in his boyhood. Instead, people in Crumlin, a working-class neighborhood in Dublin, took him in as part of the local tapestry. Frank Lynott, Phil's granddad, became a father figure for him, someone who'd watch out for him, who'd tell him about life, who'd let the boy dream big. Philomena stayed in Manchester but never disappeared from Phil's life. Whenever she could, she'd see him, bring news from England, maybe share a funny story from that famously eclectic Clifton Grange Hotel, nicknamed The Biz, which counted all kinds of entertainers among its guests. Meanwhile, Phil was forging the friendships that would shape his teen years, discovering music through his Uncle Timothy's record collection full of Motown grooves and the breezy harmonies of the Mamas and the Papas. It was here that the seeds of his performance style were planted, a love of soulful, catchy, genre-blending tunes. In 1965, not yet out of his mid-teens, Phil began testing his voice in a band called the Black Eagles. He handled lead vocals with a budding drummer named Brian Downey at his side. They played covers around Dublin's clubs, fueling that local scene vibe of smoky pubs, cheap pints, and new bands popping up all the time. Even though the Black Eagles eventually broke up, Lynott tasted that sweet thrill of stepping onto a stage and belting out songs for an audience. His sense of showmanship was still a flicker, not quite the on-stage blaze that would later captivate thousands, but he was learning, and quickly. When the Black Eagles fizzled, Phil hopped around, even joining a group called Kama Sutra for a moment, before landing in a band named Skid Row. Led by Brendan Brush Shields, Skid Row featured some real talent, including guitar wunderkind Gary Moore, who would weave in and out of Phil Lynott's life for years to come. Back then, Phil didn't play any instrument himself. He focused on the vocals. To amplify his presence, he used effects like echo boxes and even smeared boot polish under his eyes, a striking visual that foreshadowed the flamboyant stage persona he'd refine in Thin Lizzy. But as these early chapters often go, things didn't stay smooth for long. Phil's singing in Skid Row was sometimes off-key, leading to concerns about his throat health. He ended up leaving the band to have his tonsils sorted, while Bruce Shields took over singing duties, and in a twist, taught Phil how to play bass. Phil purchased a Fender Jazz bass for £36 from Shields, who gave him lessons. Suddenly, Lynott had a new dimension to his music. He could sing and thump the bass in tandem, anchoring songs from both the low end and the vocal mic. It was a stepping stone that eventually led him to form Orphanage with his buddy Brian Downey. That new group played a blend of originals and covers, dabbling in Bob Dylan, Free, and Jeff Beck, while Phil worked on mastering his newly acquired bass skills. These were foundational scrappy times, full of late-night jam sessions, battered vans, and half-empty clubs that offered little more than a platform to experiment and find a voice. Decades later, lost demo tapes from Orphanage and Skid Row would reemerge, giving fans a taste of the raw, embryonic Lynott before he became a star. Then came the pivot that would change everything, Thin Lizzy. It was late 1969, and Phil Lynott crossed paths with guitarist Eric Bell via keyboardist Eric Rickson. Brian Downey was still in the mix, and the three of them gelled, forging a tight unit. Rickson initially joined as well, but parted ways after their debut single. As for the band's unusual name, they borrowed Thin Lizzy from a comic reference to the Ford Model T, then tweaked it to Thin Lizzy, and to mimic a Dublin accent, stuck an H in there. And just like that, a new force in rock was born. If you can imagine them in a small Dublin rehearsal space, hashing out the earliest ideas, Lynott was the driving visionary, though ironically on stage he was still a bit shy. People saw Eric Bell as the focal point, with Lynott hovering more in the background. That wouldn't last. Thin Lizzy's early days were rocky. Their second album, Shades of a Blue Orphanage, 1972, was recorded under tough conditions, and at one point, Lynott almost left to form a different group, ironically, with Deep Purple's Ritchie Blackmore and Ian Pace. He stuck around, he liked being the boss, and the band slogged through financial woes by doing an album of Deep Purple covers under the moniker Funky Junction. Imagine a scenario in which Lynott, with his distinctive baritone, was supposed to belt out Ian Gillan's banshee-like vocals. That mismatch was comedic enough that Lynott chose not to sing on the record at all. Still, these experiences built grit and taught him to hustle. By the time Thin Lizzy scored an opening slot for Slade in late 1972, Lynott was determined to up his game. Slade's manager, Chaz Chandler, threatened to boot them from the tour if Phil didn't improve his stage presence. So Phil attached a mirror to his bass and started commanding the spotlight like a frontman possessed. It worked. He discovered a flair for showmanship that soon became legendary, an Irish rock star reflecting both the audience and the stage lights right back at them. In 1973, Thin Lizzy nabbed their first major hit with a rocked-up version of the Irish folk tune Whiskey in the Jar. Its success signaled that something magical was brewing, though subsequent releases didn't exactly rocket up the charts. More changes were on the horizon. After the exhilarating rush of Whiskey in the Jar, guitarist Eric Bell bowed out. Gary Moore returned briefly, and Brian Downey also took a hiatus. By 1974, Thin Lizzy's stability was hanging by a thread. Lynott, feeling the weight of keeping this band afloat, refused to let go. He recruited the twin guitar lineup that would eventually define Thin Lizzy's sound, Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson. They stepped in at a time when the band was on the verge of unraveling. That injection of fresh blood, plus Lynott's laser-focused songwriting, led to 1976's Jailbreak, a record that changed everything. It spawned The Boys Are Back in Town, arguably Thin Lizzy's most iconic track. The song soared into the UK top 10 and topped charts in Ireland, eventually becoming an anthem recognized worldwide. Suddenly, Lynott and his bandmates were international rock darlings, touring the U.S., mesmerizing fans in Canada, and carving out a unique niche with their Celtic-tinged brand of hard rock. Yet success has its price. During a tour with Rainbow, Lynott caught hepatitis, forcing Thin Lizzy to cancel shows. The man who had just started living his dream found himself sidelined by illness. Meanwhile, the band's new fame was skyrocketing. Lynott might have felt that paradox. On one hand, unstoppable momentum. On the other, frailty under the spotlight. He also built friendships on the road. One notable buddy was Huey Lewis of the band Clover, pre-Power of Love days. Lynott's showmanship influenced Lewis, who was still figuring out how to command a crowd. Lynott himself was soaking up American culture, weaving it into songs like Cowboy Song and Massacre. He fell in love with L.A. and carried that swagger back to Europe, fueling new tunes with images of wide-open highways and neon cityscapes. The late 1970s ushered in Thin Lizzy's peak years. Albums like Johnny the Fox, 1976, Bad Reputation, 1977, Live and Dangerous, 1978, and Black Rose, A Rock Legend, 1979, kept fans enthralled. Live and Dangerous, in particular, has frequently been hailed as one of the finest live rock records ever, capturing Lynott front and center on the cover, singing his heart out. But behind that bright veneer, the band was struggling with a revolving door of guitarists, creative tensions, and eventually Lynott's deepening entanglement with heroin. Brian Robertson was replaced by Gary Moore in a tense shuffle. Scott Gorham stuck around as a loyal collaborator, but the turbulence couldn't be contained. As the 1980s crept in, Thin Lizzy's commercial success showed cracks. Lynott's addiction issues grew. Their longtime manager, Chris O'Donnell, parted ways. Touring became a logistical and emotional chore, especially when Lynott couldn't get his fix in certain countries, leading to subpar shows and personal anguish. In 1983, with co-guitarist Gorham wanting out, Lynott decided to disband Thin Lizzy, effectively ending an era that had shaped modern hard rock. But let's not imagine him slinking off quietly. While all this was happening, Lynott was branching out. He appeared in Jeff Wayne's The War of the Worlds musical project, taking on the role of Parson Nathaniel. He also rubbed shoulders with members of the Sex Pistols and The Damned, forming a loose-knit side project called The Greedies, short for The Greedy Bastards, that played a mix of Thin Lizzy and Pistol songs, proving that his musical tastes were eclectic and that he embraced the emerging punk scene with open arms. Around this time, Lynott also coaxed Midge Ure, soon to be of Ultravox, to do a short stint in Thin Lizzy. He championed Ure's career behind the scenes, showing that Lynott had a knack for spotting talent and building alliances. He wasn't content merely to be the Thin Lizzy guy either. In 1980, Lynott released his first solo album, Solo in Soho, which included two moderate hits, Dear Miss Lonely Hearts and King's Call. The latter featured the distinctive guitar of Mark Knopfler, lending a certain Dire Straits flair to Lynott's reflective style. The album cracked the UK top 30, affirming that fans still wanted to hear from him, even outside the safe bubble of Thin Lizzy. But his second solo effort, the Phil Lynott album, 1982, fared less well. Despite Old Town earning some radio spins and Yellow Pearl becoming the theme for Top of the Pops, the project didn't ignite the same spark. His wide-ranging creativity was sometimes overshadowed by personal issues, especially the mounting drug habit that even close friends struggled to confront. Amid these high-profile rock escapades, Lynott also had a quieter, more literary side. He published 2 slim volumes of poetry, Songs for While I'm Away in 1974 and Philip in 1977. The first book contained a handful of Thin Lizzy lyrics, plus an extra poem, while the second carried on that introspective streak. It's easy to overlook that side of him. After all, he was an in-your-face rocker on stage. But Lynott was reflective. He used words to shape vivid narratives, whether in a track like Emerald, with its Celtic battle imagery, or in a poem that revealed some personal longing. In 1997, both books were combined into a new edition, testament to the lasting appeal of his writing beyond the riffs and solos. On Valentine's Day 1980, Lynott married Caroline Crowther, whose father happened to be the well-known comedian Leslie Crowther. It looked like a bright new chapter for him. Stable family life, continuing success, a future with big possibilities. They had 2 daughters, Sarah, born in 1978, immortalized in the 1979 Thin Lizzy song of the same name, and Kathleen, born in 1980, who inspired a solo track by Lynott 2 years later. However, life seldom runs as smoothly as a chart-busting guitar intro. Lynott's drug use kept chipping away at his personal life, and by 1984, the marriage collapsed. On top of that, Lynott had fathered a son in 1968 who had been placed for adoption, a piece of his life that only came to wider attention when that son discovered his birth father's identity in 2003. Phil always prided himself on being Irish, even a shareholder of Manchester United and good friends with football legend George Best. But these paternal complexities showed that behind the rock icon was a man whose family dynamics were far more complicated than they appeared. After Thin Lizzy officially broke up, Lynott launched one final band project called Grand Slam in 1984. It brought together players like Deutsch Nagel, Lawrence Archer, Robbie Brennan, and Mark Stanway. You might imagine that a newly liberated Lynott would funnel all his creativity into this fresh endeavor, forging a second wave of success. But the reality was harsh. With Thin Lizzy's shadow looming large, Grand Slam struggled to land gigs and major financing. Plus, Lynott's heroin problem was no secret, and it hurt the band's credibility. They put on some fiery shows, but the magic never quite materialized, leading to a breakup within the same year. Meanwhile, Lynott carried on collaborating with Gary Moore, churning out chart hits like Parisian Walkways, and, in 1985, Out in the Fields, which cracked the UK top 5. These flashes of success proved he still had the ability to captivate an audience, even if he was increasingly weighed down by internal battles. His private life was deteriorating. He wasn't asked to join Live Aid in 1985, an event organized by his acquaintances Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, both of whom had been in Lynott's orbit. Being left off that global stage stung. He made a few TV appearances, including the BBC quiz show Pop Quiz, but he was a far cry from the unstoppable force who once fronted Thin Lizzy. Still, he pressed forward with new music. In late 1985, he released a final single, 19, co-written with Lawrence Archer and Mark Stanway, produced by Paul Hardcastle. It carried a contemporary flavor, a hint that Lynott might be trying to adapt to the changing soundscape of mid-'80s pop rock. Behind the scenes, he mentioned possibly reforming Thin Lizzy to recapture the old spirit. You can sense the heartbreak there, a man wanting to conquer his demons and resurrect the band that had given him so much purpose, all while he still had the spark of creativity. Then on Christmas Day, 1985, it all came crashing down. Lynott collapsed at his home in Kew. His mother, Philomena, who hadn't known the full extent of his heroin addiction, found him. In a frantic turn of events, she called Caroline, who recognized the signs of an overdose, and they rushed him to a clinic. Soon he was taken to Salisbury Infirmary, battling septicemia, blood poisoning. He briefly showed signs of recovery, but the damage to his body was extensive. Pneumonia and heart failure followed, culminating in his death on January 4th, 1986. He was just 36 years old. His funeral took place in Richmond with a second service in Dublin. Yet death didn't halt Phil Lynott's legacy. Thin Lizzy reunited for a one-off show in 1986, featuring Bob Geldof on vocals, and later resumed touring in the 1990s with changing lineups. Their story continued to reverberate through the rock world, but to honor Lynott properly, they decided not to release new studio material as Thin Lizzy. Instead, under the name Black Star Riders, they recorded new tracks, out of respect for the memory of the man who had been the band's creative heartbeat. Meanwhile, from 1987 onward, an annual event called Vibe for Philo took place around the anniversary of his death. Organized by Lynott's friend, Smiley Bolger, it featured tribute bands, musicians from various Thin Lizzy lineups, and fans from across the globe. For decades, it was a testament to how strongly Lynott's spirit still burned in rock culture. Reissues of his work came thick and fast. In April 2007, the 1996 documentary The Rocker, a portrait of Phil Lynott, saw a DVD release. In 2010, a compilation named Yellow Pearl compiled his solo tracks, plus various B-sides and deep cuts. A trust was established in his name in 1994, designed to support aspiring musicians and distribute charitable funds. At the same time, his mother Philomena never let the world forget her son. She visited his grave often and famously objected when Mitt Romney's 2012 U.S. presidential campaign tried using "The Boys Are Back in Town" at rallies, claiming it contradicted Lynott's inclusive values and personal beliefs. It was a reminder that even from beyond the grave, Lynott's music remained potent and relevant, capturing the spirit of rebellious fun. In 2005, a bronze statue of Phil Lynott was erected on Harry Street in central Dublin, unveiled by his mother and numerous Thin Lizzy alumni like Gary Moore, Eric Bell, Brian Robertson, Scott Gorham, Darren Wharton, and Brian Downey. It stands as a near-life representation of the charismatic rocker we lost too soon, guitar in hand, ready to belt out the next track. Postage stamps in Ireland featuring Lynott's image were issued in October 2019, and in late November of that same year, the Central Bank of Ireland released a limited run of silver commemorative coins honoring what would have been Lynott's 70th birthday. Dublin continued to pay homage, unveiling a plaque at his childhood home on Leland Road in Crumlin, and even in his birthplace of West Bromwich, fans crowdfunded for a bronze bust in 2021. Though some complained it didn't quite capture his likeness, the emotional thrust behind it was clear. This man, once just a kid who shuttled between England and Ireland, had become a cultural symbol worthy of monuments and memorials. Close your eyes. Picture Phil on stage, boot polish under his eyes in those early days, or decked out in some flamboyant outfit with the mirror pickguard reflecting the stage lights in a swirl of color. Feel the energy of the band, the heartbeat of the drums, the twin guitars soaring, and Lynott's voice, half croon, half rock snarl, tying it all together. Let it wash over you. If you listen closely, you'll hear a man who poured everything into his art: love, anger, joy, regret, hope, and heartbreak. That alchemy is what makes great music transcend its era, and it's precisely what keeps Phil Lynott's legacy alive.